Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. I'm really pleased and honoured to have my guest on the show today, Richard Martin. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Richard and I connected at a wellbeing workplace event through LinkedIn, and I was really inspired by his story that he shared at that event. So I'm really looking forward to Richard sharing it on the show, because I think it's such an important topic, particularly given the change in the workplace that people have experienced and the expectations that are being placed on people from a workplace perspective, and the importance of creating the right environment, the right charter, the right commitment at a workplace level to allow people to address problems that they're struggling with, and also to provide the right support to help people have open and honest conversations so that people can do the deep work that they might need to do, and also get the best out of their brain, which is their engine of life. So before we start, let me just introduce Richard for those that don't know. So Richard spent the first 20 years of his adult life as a successful lawyer in London. He experienced a breakdown in 2011, and since then has worked as a mental health in the workplace, being a trainer, advocate and author. And I know you're a mental health first aider like myself. And just welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you. And I say it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So before we really start, what would you say you're really passionate about in life right now? What really gets you out of bed in the morning?
Two things, I'd say. I'm about to slightly change my job, so that's exciting, and we'll probably focus on that. And I'm about to start doing a trip to kayak down the Thames with a mate. So we're going to take it in stages, but next weekend we'll do our first leg to see how we get on and whether we can face another 200 kilometres side by side.
Well, are you doing the Devizes to Westminster? Is that what you're doing?
I don't like racing and competing, so no. But we're doing our own little version, which will be much slower, much more gentle, probably with more stops for lunch. So yeah, in a much more enjoyable way, but the same
How
scenery.
Very sensible. And you just took me back about 20-30 years, because I was training for Devizes to Westminster. For those that don't know, it's a 125-mile race from Devizes to Westminster on the Thames, and it was horrendous, the training, because I was only 16 at the time, and we ended up stopping it because the relationship with my friend was more important than the trauma of trying to get fit for it and work as a team. And we're still friends today. So
well, the guy I'm doing mine with, he's a more serious kayaker than I am. So one of the things we need to work out is, can he really go as slow as I need him to for that length of time? So we'll find out.
Well, I'm sure it'll be a real experience in so many different ways. It's certainly something that's really tough to do, isn't it? To work as a team in such a small environment that maybe you're not wholly used to, with all the elements working with or against you, depending on what the weather is for the day.
In my head, the sun's going to be shining the entire time. There's going to be no stiff winds. It's all going to be gentle and calm and beautiful. So tell me that was how the Devizes race was.
You're going with the flow, so you'll be able to cruise.
Yeah. And we're in separate boats, so I can go if I decide that it's just going a bit too fast, I can just slow down a bit.
Well, you can also sit behind him, so he can do the hard work like they do on pelotons when you're cycling. So you catch his wake, even though if it's small, make a big difference.
The problem is he's a lot thinner than I am. Anyway, we'll work it out.
It'll be okay. You've got the flow behind you, so you should be all right, even if you might be a bit broader.
Yeah.
And what's the other thing? You said that's one of the things. What's the other thing?
So for the last, this is work, but for the last 3 years as part of my role at Byrne Dean, I've been kind of helping promote and develop the Mindful Business Charter, which is a kind of cross-business initiative around mental health and particularly looking at stress in the workplace. And that's becoming an ever-increasing part of my role. So with effect from Friday this week, so the 1st of April, I will be kind of formally splitting my time. So doing 3 days a week for the Mindful Business Charter and 2 days a week still with Byrne Dean. So that feels quite an exciting new development.
Wow, that's really exciting, and something that I'm sure would not have happened if you hadn't been on the journey that you've been on.
No, for sure. And certainly, I mean, yeah, all of the work that I do or have done over the last, whatever it is, 8 years, 9 years, has been as a result of that. There's a wise chap once said to me, the best causes are the ones that choose you. And if you'd taken me back sort of 12, 13 years ago and said, in 2022, you'll be doing this, I'd have said, no, I won't. That's ridiculous. But
and I think it would be the same for me, to be fair, because my journey was, having a big crash in the workplace. And if somebody told me what I would be doing now 10 years ago, I would have been really excited, but I wouldn't have been so excited about the journey to get there.
Yeah, but the journey's important.
Oh yes, and also very fulfilling. I found, even though it has its huge ups and downs. So before we start to hear more about your journey, what would you say optimal brain health is for you personally?
So for me, it is a combination of feeling like I'm doing purposeful work that is making a difference with people who appreciate that and who are kind and supportive, and that it's manageable. So I push myself. I like to be busy, but I know that I have, like we all do, I know I have my limits. And so being able to kind of work within those limits and manage them, obviously pushing them at times, but having having a degree of control so that I can make sure that I notice when things are getting out of hand and then can do something about it, I think.
And I know you wrote a book about this, because I'm really interested to explore how it became unmanageable in your story in terms of the workload. And your book, gosh, I've written it down.
This too will pass.
This too will pass, thank you. Which is all about your story, your journey. And reading it is that it started quite far back, didn't it, in terms of the build up to the
yes.
point when you had burnout. Would you mind taking us on your journey?
Of course. And the my wife, ex-wife, but wife at that point, we still got on very well, Lucy. She wrote when I was getting the book ready for publish, I said to her, would you like to add anything? And she said, oh, damn right I would. And she wrote quite a lot of stuff that she thought should go in. And I said, well, I'm not going to put all of that in, but she had a little bit that I put as a prologue, which is something along the lines of, it was like, she said, a breakdown isn't the beginning of a mental health problem, it's the publication of it. She said it was like building your house on the slopes of a volcano. You kind of know where you've built and you can hear it rumbling and feel it rumbling, but you're desperately hoping that it'll never actually erupt. So, and I think, like so many people, I think the kind of origins of my problems began way back in childhood, and the kind of the rules and beliefs and kind of unconscious thinking patterns that you build up for all sorts of different reasons, which then kind of inform the way in which you respond to the world. So for all sorts of reasons, I was a desperately good boy who worked as hard as possible to achieve and to stay out of trouble, because trouble was difficult. And
how old were you when that started, when you had to be that desperately good child?
As long as I can remember. So, from a very young age.
Okay.
And part of it was kind of avoiding problems. Part of it is being a younger brother and having two brothers above me in school and always hearing about, oh, you're just another Martin child. And I was thinking, no, I'm not just another Martin child. But so I was, and those sort of thinking and behavioral traits helped me become successful. They helped me get good grades at school. They helped me get to a good university, get a good degree. They helped me get a good job. They helped me advance in that job because I was somebody who was just, yeah, I can do that. And I'll put all of my effort into it and try and do as good a job as I possibly can and never say no. And when people have problems, bring them to me because I'll solve them. I'll help you out with that.
Because you needed to be a desperately good boy.
Yeah. And it was only when, a sort of point when I was 40, just before 41, I think. And at that point in my life, I was a senior partner in a law firm. I was on the management committee of the law firm. My next job was going to be running the law firm, so I had a kind of career map out there. I had 3 young children. I had a beautiful wife, lovely house. I was involved in all sorts of things in the community. And looked from the outside very much as being the sort of archetypal successful person.
And you were involved in everything in the community. You said yes to everything. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd say so. I think I probably didn't say quite enough yeses to people at home. So I think that they didn't see as much of me as they might have wanted to, and as I would have wanted to. But there was that sense of, well, these people are asking me to do stuff. It's good stuff. Why wouldn't I, sort of thing. And not feeling any boundaries. And I suppose also not really understanding my own limits and knowing that actually sometimes you do need to say no because you can't say yes to everything. And there was a point, so in the early part of 2011, I was seeing a coach, and the coach said to me after a while, he said, I know you now, Richard, and I know the firm you work for, and I can completely understand why they want you to be the next managing partner. I get that. What I don't really understand is what you want. And I looked at him in a sort of slightly puzzled way, as if to say, I've got no idea what you mean by that question. I've got a big job, I've got clients, I've got a team, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got this, I've got that. What do you mean? What do I want? And that moment, it wasn't at all the cause of what happened next, but I think it was probably catalytic in the sense of it just forced me to step back and reflect and say, hang on, why am I doing all of this stuff? And also kind of raise the possibility that I didn't need to be the person that I had always been. I
think I just want to pause you there because it's coaching is such a powerful tool because it gives you the opportunity to take the lid off the pressure pots. And really you took the cap off the volcano that wasn't dormant but was about to erupt, and sometimes certainly on the coaching side, people don't realize necessarily how volatile the volcano is when they start lifting the lid off as a coach, and neither does the person who's in that environment when they start taking the lid off, because like a pressure pot, suddenly you take the lid off and there's a huge explosion because you realize you've been keeping that lid on for such a long time.
So I like that analogy. The one I often think about is a buildings, and you start with when you're building a house, you start with your foundations and you lay those out, and then you start building off that and build off that, and over the years you develop and extend and so on and so forth, and after 41 years you've got this massive edifice of a life. And it was as if somebody came along one day and said, those foundations, they're not actually there, or they're certainly not as strong as you think they are. So it was kind of a sense of the cracks beginning to appear, and so I kind of in terms of kind of narrative, we went on holiday as a family in the May half term of that year to a house that we'd bought in France a few months earlier. So again, lovely thing and so on. And I spent the week that we were there doing lots of bramble clearing and all sorts of kind of manual labor because, hey, it needs to be done, doesn't it? And on the way back, and I knew I was stressed. But you just kind of think, well, but you've got a big job and you've got these responsibilities and so on. Of course, it's but just carry on, because that's all you really know how to do. And if you just try a bit harder and get your head down, whatever, it'll be all right. because, as I say, that's the behaviour that's got you through all the time before. And it was coming home. We were driving around the Périphérique south of Paris, and I started feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Not that uncomfortable, but a little bit sort of, that doesn't feel right. But
yeah.
And then suddenly, as we were approaching a toll gate, a péage gate, I just started feeling desperately ill and thought I was going to die. And my heart was going all over the place. My breathing was all over the place. I was feeling sick. But more than anything, all I could think of was, I've got to escape. I've got to get out of this car. So stopped the car in the middle of lots of lanes of fast-moving traffic and proceeded to kind of wander off until eventually they closed the motorway and asked me gently, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't really know." And it all sort of started from there, really.
And what was the before I ask that question, I think for yourself, you're not alone, you know, in this journey where you've had this pressure pot building, because a lot of professionals that I've spoken to on the show, in fact, use action to escape emotion. So they use, and we'll talk about the 5 pillars, you know, throughout the show, but, you know, our feelings, our emotions is the thing that drives our behaviors. But when you've experienced trauma as a child and your escape has been to be better, to perform better, to escape from the trauma that you're experiencing, you continue until you know what the driver is behind, you know, the reason behind that behavior. You continue to do it. And although it is your escape mechanism as a child, it becomes your destruction mechanism as you continue to erode your capability to keep doing. It's like a mouse on a treadmill, and you burn out, basically, because you just can't keep doing to escape what is in essence a trauma that's locked inside your mind, because you haven't had the tools. Go on.
Well, there's and I agree with all of that. And there's a sense in which the trauma is replaying itself on a daily basis, because
absolutely
you start transferring onto other people in your life the relationship that caused you the trauma, sort of thing. So it's something that plays out in a boardroom, in a marriage, in a whatever, because you're just desperately afraid of getting into that situation again.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you were on the outside, externally to people, you were the epitome of success, but on the inside you hadn't been given the opportunity, or perhaps the right support throughout your life to do the deep work to let go of what was beholden to you, was that you are enough. You don't have to keep doing to prove you are enough, because you are enough just as you are.
And that piece around, I mean, I don't know how deep we're going to go here, but the I'm in your hands now, Ruth. But that sense of unconditional love that just says, as you say, it doesn't matter what you do or whatever, you will always be safe and loved here. If you don't feel you've had that, then that is it's a hole that nobody else can fill. I don't think, apart from perhaps yourself, and that's quite hard. And so one is always, in a sense, kind of stepping around this big black hole that says, yeah, you're not enough. You're not unconditionally loved. You're not safe. And all you can do is, what you know is to just crack on and try harder.
And that, I think, I think it's such an important point, because until you reach a pivot moment in your life where you have, unfortunately, your pivot moment was quite catastrophic because the volcano erupted, but thankfully you work through it. But until you reach that pivot point and you have the opportunity to go, do you know what, I need to work on myself, and I need to understand what programs are running in the background of my mind that is causing me to show up in the way I am showing up, and when were those programs written, the software in my mind. We don't take that time, do we, often to listen to the background software that's running. We just focus on what we're doing externally, what we're, how we're performing externally, and not truly understanding the operating system of our mind that is shaping that external performance.
There's a brilliant film. It's my favorite film. I was sent it by my work just sort of after I got ill, or after I realized how well I was, perhaps. But it's I don't think they realized the sort of how poignant it would be. But the Adjustment Bureau, which I don't know if you've seen, but it's
I haven't seen it.
Watch it. The premise of the film is that there is a plan in place for all of us, and there are these kind of vaguely supernatural characters called the Adjustment Bureau who can kind of reappear into the real world and make some little adjustments in order to keep us on the plan. So if you and I were not supposed to have met, for example, because that wasn't the plan, then just before that moment happened, somebody would have come out of a portal or something and kind of stopped us meeting, and it'd be, we're fine.
It's like being in the Matrix, and they changed the program.
And the spoiler alert is obviously two people meet, they fall in love, they weren't supposed to, and then they're sort of fighting against this bureau. And it turns out, of course, there isn't actually an adjustment bureau, and there isn't a plan. It's just all in our own heads. And we can, well, at least that's my take on the film anyway.
And also we can shape our future, can't we? But what we need to not do is try and resist stuff that just happens, because often there's a reason why it's happening to us, and be curious about the reason behind it happening. Get curious, not furious. Curious behind why it's happening, and not fight ourselves, but learn about ourselves in the process. So I'd love to go back to your, obviously you stopped on the motorway or freeway. Somebody told you what you're doing, and you said you didn't know. What happened next for you?
So they took me to a little cabin at the side of the motorway. They closed the motorway for the moment.
Were you just walking around the motorway, not really knowing where to go?
Yeah. And it was French drivers, and some of those toll lanes, they have automatic things, so they don't have to stop. So it was a little bit hairy. And they so in a lovely French, they said, have you eaten anything? And I said, well, I did have there was an apple in the sort of side pocket of the car that had probably been there. I think we brought it out with us when we drove out, and it had been there for a week. And I said, well, I did eat an English apple. And they were like, oh, right, it'll be la pomme anglaise. Ça, c'est le problème. But they called the ambulance. But in France, the ambulance and the fire crew are kind of one and the same. They're just the emergency services. So these guys arrived in a kind of makeshift fire truck. And we had a bit of an odd conversation. They took me to hospital. They checked me out for a heart attack.
Okay.
So it had sort of 3 hours of that kind of stuff until they concluded, you haven't had a heart attack. So you can go home, but maybe in the morning go and see your cardiologist, because of course we all have our own cardiologist.
Of course we do, yeah.
Maybe the French do, which might be an interesting sort of take on why they're such loving, kind people. But anyway, I went to see my GP in the morning, and he sort of listened and said, I don't think it's your heart, Richard. I think it's your head. From all that you're describing, I think what you've had is a panic attack. And it sounds like you've been under quite a lot of stress. And also some of the things you're talking about do sound like it might be signs of depression. All of which was a bit of a shock, because although I'd kind of been alive to mental illness as part of my work, and I guess family and other things, it had always been about other people, if that makes sense. I never thought that
you were in the good, I'm in the well bucket, and other people were in the ill bucket.
Yeah, and I think we do that because because we don't know about this stuff and so on, we kind of stigmatize it, and it's safer if we just keep it in the cupboard and say, yeah, it's over there. I don't really know much about it, but it's but it's not me. And for a couple of weeks, I sort of tried to do some work from home, but it was a massive struggle and becoming ever more of a struggle every day. So things that would ordinarily just be an easy thing to just get done were taking me forever. And I was becoming increasingly kind of terrified of everything. So the dog barking, the doorbell ringing, everything was just leaving me in tears and shivering behind a sofa and hiding and so on. Went to see a psychiatrist who said, yeah, stop work, and started to kind of think about a plan. But it was probably, I think it was about 4 weeks after the motorway incident when things were getting just increasingly impossible at home. I couldn't cope with being at home with the family, and the family couldn't cope with me being there either. So we went to see a psychiatrist again, and had one of those conversations that again kind of resonates. He said, we sort of said we need to do something needs to change. He said, well, do you want to be admitted to hospital? And I said, well, I don't know. You're the psychiatrist, you tell me. And he said, no, it's about what you want and what you feel and so on. I thought, okay. So I said, am I ill enough to be admitted to hospital? And he said, yeah, don't worry, you are definitely ill enough to be admitted to hospital. Don't worry about that. Okay, I said, what are they like in there? And he said, well, they're like you. And that was one of those moments of, oh, okay, it's not about other people. And so I was admitted. I think that was a Friday. I was admitted on the Saturday, and it felt as if I was incredibly fortunate. I had private medical cover, which paid for in-stay hospital in a high dependency mental institution, and I kind of felt like I crawled in on my hands and knees emotionally, and the sense of going into that place and being able to close the door and leave the world behind was immense. And to know that for as long as I was in there, I really didn't need to worry about what was going on outside.
Did you feel safe in there?
Yeah, I mean, it took time because it's a new place and you're in a very agitated state of mind and so on, and you've got things to sort of learn and stuff. I remember the first morning. So all through Saturday, I hadn't really spoken to anybody apart from a nurse to kind of check me in and so on. But I hadn't spoken to any of the other patients and so on. And on the Sunday morning, I'd kind of built up my courage to say, right, get up, go to breakfast, and whoever you see first, talk to them. And so I was in the queue, knocking on the door at 8 o'clock for breakfast, and there was somebody else there, so I started talking to them. And so we got our breakfast together, and I said, can I sit with you? And he said, no. And I was like, oh. And that just kind of, having built up the courage to kind of try and be brave and so on, knocked me back a bit. And the reason why is because he was on a different program. He was on an addiction program, and the rules of the hospital meant that they were not supposed to socially interact to any great extent with the rest of us. So he had very good reasons, but I didn't know that. So I just felt a huge rejection. And by sort of mid-morning was on the point of wanting to leave because it didn't seem to be, well, I didn't feel safe. But then somebody said, are you coming on the group walk? And I said, what group walk? And they pointed to the notice board, and then I went on the group walk and found some friends and got involved in the kind of program. So and then felt absolutely safe until, interestingly, and then it's an institution like that, what you've got is when you come in, what you see is you joining, and you kind of assume perhaps that everyone else is coming at the same time, and of course they haven't. They've come in, yesterday or 4 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago, whatever it might be. So there's never kind of changing population. And once you're there, you see this happening, and you see people who've got to no leave and so on. And by the time, after sort of 3 or 4 weeks, I was beginning to think, you know what, I don't need to be here anymore. And actually being here is probably not very helpful for me. And so there was a kind of a point where you think, right, okay, I'm ready now to go and explore the world a bit more.
What was the big shift for you on that? Because I think that's really key, because obviously you had this piece of you found emotional safety within the new environment that you were put in, to just work on yourself. What was the notable shift where you said, I can find that safety outside this environment?
Interesting. So probably a number of different factors. So I stopped getting worse. So I was on a pretty downhill trajectory, and I stopped getting worse. I hadn't been, for reasons which I won't bore you with, but there were complications in terms of me getting put onto medication, and so that took a while. But having got onto some medication, and that helped stabilize things a bit. So
you were on meds at the time.
So I was on meds at the time, feeling like there was a plan, and recognizing that, first of all, what was going on for me, I wasn't unique. There were lots of other people. There was a name for it. There was a treatment plan. There was, whatever. There was I'd begun to explore my emotions with other people in a way that I probably hadn't done before. And obviously also started to explore some of that thinking that we've talked about. And also my release, if that's the right word, was carefully managed. So, go out for half an hour and see if you can go and get a cup of coffee from the shop down the road. And then maybe try a tube journey and see how that feels, and sort of gradually in little steps.
Incremental rather than the launching you straight out into the wilderness again, so to speak.
Yeah. And that then continued because it was nearly 2 years before I went back to work. So there was a long period of gradually building stuff up. I did spend quite a lot of time in France, doing manual labor, and quite a lot of time on my own, but quite a lot of time, but with that being able to kind of control my environment and so on, and to think and just be. And then I started doing little volunteering things. So I volunteered in a charity shop kind of a couple of days a week, and that was really important because it meant I could interact with people safely. I could commit to something, and then I did a course and other bits and pieces to gradually kind of build up my sense of confidence, I suppose. There's a sense I often think about it as being a moment in which I lost the ability to be safely in the world.
And what would, if you don't mind me asking, what did you feel became unsafe? Was it your ability to navigate the world? Was it your emotional charge was out of control? What was the bit that you felt had become unsafe internally?
So I was absolutely terrified of everything. So I couldn't, if I had to, I don't know, phone my parents, I'd need to build up for about 3 hours before, and then have a 10-minute call, and then I would be exhausted for the rest of the day. If the kids made a noise, I would just be, I'd be running away and hiding. So everything in the world scared me witless. It also felt like that there was a sort of brain fog, that I was seeing the world through really thick, opaque glass, and walking through treacle. I had no energy at all. Everything was just a huge effort. And with that, depression and quite difficult feelings around whether I was able to carry on living, whether I wanted to carry on living, and so a lot of stuff kind of bringing
a lot of weight on your shoulder.
Yeah. And then also a lot of worry about how far I'd fallen. It's not quite the right expression, but the sense of, look at where you were just like 3 months ago. Nothing scared you. You could take on anything. And look at you now. And that there was an expression we used to use in the hospital a lot about mind the gap, being, try to avoid comparing where you were to where you are now, or where you are now to where you want to be, because that gap is just too big. And it's certainly, in terms of a future-looking perspective, it's way too big to contemplate that gap. All you can really do is just focus on the next 5 minutes or the next hour or the next day. So that sense of being able to, for me, recovery felt, amongst other things, it felt about being able to re-engage in the world and with other people in the world in a way that felt safe. And that's involved lots of things. It's involved self-awareness. It's involved thinking about what I want to do and how I want to spend my energy and so on. It's about my purpose, but it's also about the kind of psychological safety of the environment in which you work and so on.
Thank you for saying that, because you've just drawn on the 4 quadrants that are so important from a safety perspective when we talk about well-being. So that sense of emotional safety, where you can feel safe with your emotions and that you're able to manage them constructively rather than destructively. And then we've got the physical safety, in terms of your environment and the actions that you are able to do, is feeling safe doing things. And then we've got your mental safety, is that the thoughts that you have in your mind, knowing that the thoughts are serving you, not hurting you. And we can easily, especially when it comes to childhood trauma, have lots of negative self-talk from what someone has said to you once, twice, or many times, plays in our heads 1,000 times if we don't squash those unhelpful programs and thoughts drive emotions. And then finally, your spiritual safety, which I know when you spoke to your coach at the start, is you'd never thought about what you wanted spiritually, what you were passionate about, what you found purposeful in life, having that sense of meaning. And people often if we're trying to escape, often we seek to try and escape emotional pain. We escape through actions, or we escape mentally through creativity, to not address those emotions. But the fact that you are able to address all 4 quadrants of your well-being, and really historically you'd only focused on the 1 quadrant, which was your physical activity, that physical well-being piece, which was your escape mechanism from emotions, is really important to be able to join all of those 4 quadrants together to understand the whole of you, and not be living just a part of you.
And there's a piece, so just thinking about the kind of physical environment, so my immediate, not my immediate, but I, as I say, I went to live in France for a while, a few months, and that was very much taking myself away from this. When Lucy and I separated, and I ended up living in a basement flat, a nice basement flat, but a basement flat. And I remember thinking, it was safe and almost womb-like to retreat underground into my basement flat, where it was cool in the summer and warm in the winter. It was a little bit dark, but that's okay. And it was just almost like a cocoon. And a couple of years ago, my eldest said, well, I was moving house a year and a half ago, and my eldest daughter, who's wise, said, yeah, when you bought that flat, Dad, you needed that womb. You needed to kind of retreat from the world and be safe. And now you don't. So now I live in a house with upstairs and windows and things like that. And there is that sense of, I can be confident, and I can know that I can knock on my neighbour's door and it'll be safe, and so on.
And I think that's such an important piece, because we often think that just the doing is going to help us get well, but we have to look at the 5 pillars, which we talked about at the beginning, 5 pillars of brain health. So feelings, our actions, our connections, our thoughts, and our surroundings hugely influence our brain health. and finding the right surroundings that serve you at the time that you need them to serve you, in whatever state your brain happens to be in functionally, is really important. And it can be so different for everyone. You know, some people, like me personally, I like to be in a kind of womb-like place to be able to focus, because I can't deal with distractions, and it's comforting for me to be isolated to do the work, because distractions but they don't necessarily make me feel unsafe, but they stop my brain from working optimally. And obviously it depends on your circumstances, and I think that's such an important part of the healing journey, is looking at all of those 5 pillars to optimize all of them, to make sure you're serving your brain in the best way you can, to help it heal and to help you get the best out of it. So I'd love to transition now to the fun facts, which is where we dive into the 5 pillars. I'm just going to ask you a few questions based on the fun facts. So first one is feelings, which obviously for you was such an important part of your healing journeys, exploring your emotions. What's the funniest or most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you?
Oh gosh, the most embarrassing that's ever happened to me. This possibly isn't the most embarrassing that's ever happened to me, but I'll tell it because it's kind of interesting about brain. So I was doing a piece of training for a very important client, and I was slightly scared because it was new client, very senior people in the room, and I was delivering some new material that I wasn't quite sure of. And I knew 2 people in this, or 2 women I knew in this organization. Call them Helen and Sarah for the sake of whatever. And Sarah was supposed to be introducing me to do the training session, and we were waiting for Sarah to arrive, and it was getting a bit annoying because I just wanted to kind of get on with it because I was feeling really nervous and whatever, and there were all these important people in the room and so on. And this woman walked in who I recognized. So I said, "Hello, Sarah, thank goodness you're here. Great, we can start." And she looked at me as if to say, "Are you gone completely off your mind, Richard? I'm Helen." Like, "Oh, yeah, of course you are." And it was just an example of how, when we're nervous and so on and so forth, our brains don't work so well. And they tell us things that we want to hear. I want Sarah to arrive. So I saw a woman, I recognized her. It must be Sarah. And of course it wasn't. And everyone was kind of like, "Oh, weird, Richard." So
yeah, and do you know, I think that's a really good point, because it's so easy to get ourselves muddled, isn't it, when we're under stress? And you had the cognitive recall, you just didn't quite recall the right part of that.
yeah.
And that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to get people's names wrong. It can be embarrassing at the time, but ultimately it's okay to have these struggles, because everybody's on a spectrum. Everyone's got a brain, everyone's brain is different, and we all have different types of struggle. Some of us might not even know it yet.
And when you've lived your life always trying to get everything right, and believing if you don't get everything right, then it's going to be disastrous, seeing that actually, sometimes you mess up and it's all right. I used to do this thing on a Friday night. I'd play 5-a-side football with a bunch of dads, and they'd all played football all their lives. I hadn't. So they were really good at football and I was rubbish. And but I would run around a lot, so I tried. But the kind of, I think subconsciously, possibly, the reason why I did it was I just wanted to do something that I was really bad at.
And I think it's really important to do that. I know when we started this conversation, you said to me before I click record, "Is this edited?" And I said, well, only at the start, at the end. If we make a blunder, we just work through it, and that's okay, because that's just life, isn't it? We fall over. When we were a kid, nobody walks perfectly first time. We have to fall and fall and fall again before we learn how to walk effectively, and we're not done there, are we?
No,
if we want to become an athlete, we have to keep making mistakes before we achieve our best. So I'd love to dive into the next one, connection to yourself, which is such an important one. What's the most important value that guides you in life? This is like your moral compass.
So I am, this is going to sound very virtuous, but I feel a huge purpose in relation to helping people understand mental health and to value it and nurture it and cherish it, and to create environments in which we can do that. So I guess that would be probably my answer. There's another thing which is in my head, which is, and this may not be this is more a self-awareness thing, I suppose, but it's about, and it reflects back on something you were saying a moment ago, that just because I think something, it doesn't make it true.
Exactly.
And being able to stand back a little bit from my thoughts. And it's hard when you're in the moments, and it's hard when you're under pressure and stress and so on. But that piece about standing back and saying, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know, you might be right, but you might not be. But it's interesting you thought that.
I mean, we have about 30,000 thoughts every day. Not every single one is true. Not every single one we need to listen to. And certainly not every single one we need to shout out loud to other people. And it's really knowing that operating system that's running and turning down the volume of those negative thoughts and squashing what we would call the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that keep popping up, often from past experiences, and squashing them and saying, no, that thought isn't true. I am enough. It's so, you said, oh, this will probably feel a bit virtuous. No, it's totally fine. You are you. You don't have to apologize for who you are. Just be you and be okay.
And there's a piece along with that, which is that we all carry our personality around with us, which is, a complex matrix of all of our experiences and beliefs that we've kind of built up as a result of everything that's happened. And that will give us an instinctive reaction to situations. And we can go with that. We can always just say, yeah, that's who I am. I'm going to do that. But we've got a choice if we want to say, yeah, that's what I would normally do, but I don't have to. I could try that. And trying that every now and then is quite liberating and fun sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's so important that we give ourselves the opportunity to pause, because often we just automate, we just go on autopilot and react to a situation, but have that pause moment and say, do you know what? I can choose how I want to react to this environment. It's my choice. No one can take that away from me. And give ourselves that permission to pause, so we have that opportunity to engage our cognitive part of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, and that then allows us to take back control of our emotional brain, which is the one that helps us survive, our fight or flight part of our brain, which is our amygdala. And by having that pause, it gives our brain the time to turn on the front part and have that logical discussion with what I would say is our monkey mindset, and say, do you know what? This time I'm going to respond this way, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, agree entirely.
So next one is surroundings, which I know for you is so important and has been really, really key for your recovery journey. What's the most beautiful place you've ever visited, and what makes it so special?
It's not the most beautiful place that I've ever visited, but it is my house in France, because it was a place of just utter kind of refuge and peace and security, and it is beautiful. It's also hard work. There's always jobs to do, but it's a kind of it's a little kind of haven of tranquility in the middle of nowhere, and it's the sort of place where when you walk up the drive, your shoulders drop and you open the door and you feel like you've been hugged. And so, yeah, that'll be the place, I think.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think everybody needs to find that place where they can decompress and just be, just be,
and let's let the pace of life. I mean, I was there for not quite a year, but on and off for about a year. And in the countryside, I know this sounds silly to anybody who doesn't live in the city, but living in the countryside for a while, you get to experience the seasons and things like that in a way that you don't when you live in London or another city. And actually, not just that it's cold or wet, or that you just can't do a load of stuff for a period, and you've just got to go with, you know, the weather is doing this, therefore, you know, you've got to change your plans and you've got to go with it. And so sort of giving yourself up to nature in that way, and going with a different pace.
And working with it rather than against it.
Yeah.
You know, because we're all an integrated part of our surroundings, and we can fight it or we can leverage it to best effect for ourselves. And I think often we spend time trying to fight it rather than using it to our advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's go back to your journey. And obviously you come out of the hospital, you went into your basement apartment, you felt really safe being in, you know, as if you were in the womb, and just super comfortable. How did you transition? What was the journey to help you transition back into work to get you to where you are today?
So, and it's definitely an ongoing journey. So I think, after about 2 years, it was clear that I did need to start thinking about work again. I couldn't spend the rest of my life just wandering around. And but for as long as going back to my old law firm job, as long as going back to work meant going back there, that felt too scary. So I sort of formally left in the April of 2013. And then kind of spent some time working out an idea that was along the following lines. So I've been an employment lawyer, so I'd always dealt with kind of workplace issues, but I'd always seen them through the lens of the law. But having spent quite a lot of time in therapy and also learning about kind of how these things work and therapeutic ideas and so on and so forth, I was thinking, this is stuff that we ought to be bringing to bear into understanding why things happen in the workplace. So I kind of had this idea of creating some sort of consultancy around looking at workplace issues from a broader range of perspectives than we normally would do. And really kind of, I suppose, understanding the importance of emotions in terms of why people do the stuff they do at work. And so these ideas were kind of formulating in my head over the summer of that year. I was still not very well, so I was tentatively talking to a few people, but in a very kind of measured way. And somebody said, "Oh, have you spoken to Byrne Dean?" And I said, "No, I don't know who they are." So I was introduced to the founders of Byrne Dean, Matt Dean and Victoria Byrne, and had a conversation with them. And within half an hour, I was like, we are talking the same language. We might be coming at it from slightly different perspectives, but we're saying the same thing. Yes, I'll come and work with you if you don't mind. So I started working in kind of September, October 2013. We had an idea about what I might do. That idea didn't really kind of turn out, because quite soon we started thinking we really need to be talking about mental health in the workplace. That's what we should be doing, or that's what I should be doing. So the Byrne Dean is a consultancy. It's all about workplace culture, lots of inclusion work and leadership and so on and so forth. Lots of training, but other strategic work. But what I kind of started saying quite early on was we should be talking about mental health. And so from sort of 2014 onwards, we've been doing increasing amounts of mental health training work. So you mentioned mental health first aid, for example. So I'm a mental health first aid instructor. We also do lots of other kind of training that we've created ourselves. And we've built a team over the years working with lots of different organizations. And interestingly, building up the confidence to go back into the kind of environments that I used to work in as a lawyer, but for a while were absolutely kind of, I'm not going anywhere near there. That's just too scary. And we then, as things have developed, we developed a reputation and so on. And so when, excuse me, when the Mindful Business Charter, which I mentioned earlier, when that was launched in 2018 as an initiative between some folk in banks and some folk in law firms to say, the way we're doing lots of great work around kind of raising awareness and putting in support for people who are struggling, but there's something about the ways in which we work that isn't very healthy. and can we look at that and try and remove some of the unnecessary stress? When that was launched in 2018, they said, we're going to need some help with this. So we said, yeah, we'd love to do that. Kinder, fairer, more productive workplaces is what we're about. So that's been a part of my job for the last 3 years or so, to kind of help grow that and nurture it and so on. To the point now where, having put in place a charity around it and having grown the membership from 12 organizations to 112, and increasingly kind of global and so on, the job is much more than a kind of a bit on the side of your desk. So with effect from Friday, I'll be doing 3 days a week for that organization. And I don't know where things will go after that. We'll see, but it feels like it's an ongoing kind of journey. And there's a piece around, I mean, I'm increasingly, what's the right word? Driven or whatever, by the idea that we've spent the last 3-4 decades investing ever more amounts of time and energy and effort into mental health. And that's good, obviously. But the focus seems to have been primarily on the individual. So if you are struggling, Ruth,
I agree.
Here's some supports, go and see the person, blah, 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 come back when you're ready. But despite all of that investment and all of that effort, the levels of distress are continuing to rise. And at some point we have to say, it's not the people, it's the system.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I from my personal workplace experience, being put on resilience training after, just before I had was told I was put on a performance review unexpectedly, told I had no emotional intelligence. It was all my fault. Nobody looked at the system causing me to be the way I was. And there was no action on fixing the system to create a better environment for people to work. And it was very much on the employee being broken rather than the system being broken. And I think it's such an important thing that we must look at the system back to the 5 pillars, which is where my 5 pillars came from, is that no one was looking at the facts, feelings, actions, connections, thoughts and surroundings. They were not looking at the facts. It was all based on perception, but not looking at the facts behind why I was, showing up the way I was. And there were lots of reasons outside of the workplace that was causing me to struggle. And there were lots of problems with the system and the workplace that made it impossible for me to succeed. And I think it's absolutely fundamental that we don't, mental health has had a habit historically of pointing the finger at the person as being at fault, rather than looking at the system causing the problem. And which is why I love to talk about brain health, because everybody has a brain and you're not on the right or the wrong side of the mental health, mental illness, okay or not okay, because we can be at different states throughout the same day. But is to look at the, brain health, and the root cause of not achieving optimal brain health is so important.
Absolutely. And there's my brain works in images, so I always make analogies. And if 100 of us are working in the same building and 50 of us develop asbestosis, great that the other 50 haven't. But the 50 you have, let's treat them for the asbestosis, but somebody please come and have a look at the roof and what's been put in there, because it's not going to be their fault.
Exactly. And it's so important that we do take that time to look at the building. Coming back, the importance of surroundings, hugely influential. Your surroundings isn't just about the structure of the building, it's about the people that you're surrounded with. And firsthand how the people you get surrounded with from an early age massively influence your performance and how your brain is wired. And it continues to influence us throughout our entire life. And we can rewire our brains and make them better and fix them, but we need to be given the right soil the right environment, the right, just as with a flower needs to grow, there's no point in putting it in a toxic soil. It's not going to grow, or shielding it from the sun. It's not going to achieve its full potential. And you can't blame the flower for that.
No, and I think there's a piece, I think, that when you say you can rewire your brain, I'm not sure you can. I think what you can do is you can put some new wiring in, but the old wiring is still there. And there is so we can develop new ways of thinking, and we can challenge things and be more self-aware and all the rest of it. But some of those early stuff that has been, laid down and repeated and so on for years and years on end, it's still there. And particularly when you're under pressure or feeling vulnerable or whatever, it's quite easy to relapse back into unhelpful thinking patterns if you're not careful. But
you can. I'd love to spend another session showing you how, but you can break those connections through certain therapies, which is what I do. Is to literally stop those connections from occurring any further. Particularly helpful for people with PTSD and past childhood trauma. You can stop people from experiencing somatosensory releases that they have as a result of past trauma. You can change your memory. It's incredibly powerful, our brain. What we don't do enough of is give people the tools to change the wiring and the techniques to do that too, if the tools are not serving them. So there are many ways in which we can rewire our brains, but often not talked about. Havening is what I do, is one of the psychosensory techniques where we can actually break the channels that you have associated with past trauma, and it's incredibly powerful.
I had some EMDR at one stage as well.
EMDR,
I absolutely get where you're coming from. And I'm not. Obviously, I'm not decrying the benefits of
no, that's fine.
Therapies. I think there's a you can teach an old dog new tricks.
I agree, and I think also, we don't know that much about the brain. It's like the final frontier, and there's still so much we have yet to learn. And it's not just about the brain, because the brain is connected to every part of us, and also we, through our five senses, is connected to the world. And so we can't just look at the brain in isolation. We have to look at it from an integrated perspective. And make sure that we do that for the people that need the help, and give them the right support that they need. So such an exciting topic, so much work to do. Like you say, it's always work in progress, isn't it? And for myself, as also experienced past trauma, there's always stuff that we can do and that we need to keep working on in order to heal ourselves. Richard, it's been an absolutely brilliant discussion. What one piece of advice would you give for anyone who is, let's pick the moment, who's gone into coaching and they're worried that they've just opened Pandora's box, or that the volcano's about to erupt? What one piece of advice would you give to someone in that situation?
Oof. I think, obviously, when one has got to that sort of cliff edge, the temptation is always to say, "Don't get there." But in your question, I already am. I think it's there's a sense, isn't there, in which when you recognise that something quite big is happening, when you've been challenged, and those foundations have been challenged or are cracking, or I can't remember the analogy you used, but anyway, the kind of when you realise the lids come off, you need to react to that, and you need to recognise that is something big is happening, and I suppose find a find a safe place to process it, and to see where it goes, because it may erupt in a big way. It may settle, it may whatever, but being kind enough to yourself, I suppose, to recognize the enormity of what might be happening, and not necessarily being scared of it. The temptation might always be to clamp that lid straight back on again and say, no, I don't want to look at that. Yeah. And I'm sure lots of people do that, and sometimes successfully, because the pressure cooker is really strong and they manage to carry on. But I think not being afraid of, there was a sense after I was sort of in hospital and so on, that and partly with people in hospital, but partly outside of that, where you could talk to somebody and you'd realize that they had looked over the abyss. They'd looked into that, whatever that sort of, I don't know, they dared to open the box. And they're stronger and more self-aware, and as a result, they're also more interesting and possibly more honest, and not being afraid to go there, I think.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important that we embrace that, and like you say, not be afraid, because it's important to go there and go on that healing journey, because often you find that people who do put the pressure lid back on are unable to push it down. It's not actually releasing the pressure's still building and building, and often it gets to a point where the body says no, and we express trauma physically, often through chronic illnesses. Cancer is a classic one, as well as fibromyalgia and other types of chronic illnesses, because our body's saying no, because our mind hasn't been listening. So I think it's really important we take the time to listen and do the work for ourselves and find that safe space to do it.
And there's obviously, with that too, the impact on everyone else around you. And whilst you are, I don't know, whistling away madly like a pressure cooker, it's not nice to live with. And it's having an impact. And so that piece around, finding the time to gently release that pressure and turn the gas down a bit.
Yeah, so important. Thank you for sharing that. How can people get hold of you? As I'm really excited about your journey going forward. How can people get hold of you?
Well, I'm on this big show with Ruth Allan. That's the best way. So website for Byrne Dean, www.byrnedean.com, or the Mindful Business Charter, mindfulbusinesscharter.com. I'm on LinkedIn. So love to hear from people.
And we'll put all of those links in the show notes, along with the film that you mentioned. I'll put a link to that as well. Thank you for sharing that. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. And it's such an important one. And we really do, I really do honour and appreciate you for the work that you're doing in helping people make the workplace a better place to be.
Well, thank you. And this, I mean, one of the things I haven't mentioned that I'm involved with is a campaign with the Lord Mayor of London around This Is Me, which is all about using storytelling to break down the stigma. And, what you're doing here is such valuable work from that perspective. So thank you.
Oh, no, you're most welcome. Thank you for your time.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like and share this episode and leave a review on my website or on Apple Podcasts. If you're looking for opportunities to optimize your brain health or unchain your pain from a past trauma, make sure you visit my website, www.ruthmaryallen.com, and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get 10% off all programs. And always remember, you are not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to make it better. You have the power to unchain your pain and optimize your brain power and performance so that you can win back energy and time doing what you love.
episode of Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain with Dr. Ruth Allan is for educational and demonstration purposes only. The information shared in each episode should not be interpreted as medical advice. This episode should not be used to self-diagnose or self-treat any health, medical or physical condition. Do not use this episode to avoid going to your healthcare professional or to replace the advice they give you. Consult with a trusted healthcare professional before doing anything contained in this episode. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact www.ruthmaryallen.com/connect.